Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross and I was always taught how to voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now this week we are going to be mostly talking about new decks, which makes me very happy indeed. For a while now we've been talking about all kinds of new cards coming out of Japan that are looking good, and Primal Clash and all of that. And I know I haven't finished my look at the Primal Clash set. We have looked at EXs and we've looked at the stadiums and the tools. We've yet to look in depth at the supporters, items, or non-EX Pokemon, but I refer you back to my old podcast where I looked back through them when they were Tidal Storm and Gaia Volcano in Japan. If you just look for podcasts in the past which are titled, one's titled Gaia Volcano, one's titled Tidal Storm, you'll be able to find my thoughts about the set in depth, which is why I haven't been too worried about finishing them off. Now I know I haven't yet got my top 10 cards of Primal Clash up on YouTube. That is going up soon, and I'm going to have my Excadrill deck breakdown that is going up on YouTube today. So if you're listening to this podcast on the day I post it, it'll be up very shortly. If you're listening to it on any other day, it will already be up there. Now I've also got a game played with the Seismitoad deck that I took out at the cities this past week, which I'm going to be putting up on the YouTube channel in the very near future. And I'm in contact with the people who streamed the cities I went to at the weekend. I'm hoping I'll be able to get the top 8, top 4 and the final, get the video files for that, so that I can have my commentary and get them up on the YouTube channel in the very near future. So, lots of good stuff coming up on the YouTube front, don't you worry about that. But the good news, if you want to find me on YouTube, by the way, just search PTCG Radio on YouTube, or Google PTCG Radio YouTube. You'll find it very, very easily. That's the way the internet works. It's easy to find stuff. Now, what we are going to be looking at today is new decks. We're going to be talking about the cities that I went to at the weekend, and we're going to be talking about Florida Regionals, both of which brought up one deck which I think you should be aware of and I think you might want to know about. So, first, let's have a look at a little bit of news. I say a little bit of news. Oh, I should also say we're going to have a lovely interview with my good friend Luke Kirkham. Just like last week with Nick Pierce, we are going to chuck it on just at the end of the podcast today. And then hopefully you are going to be able to, have a good listen to that, and hopefully you'll enjoy it and all that good stuff. I love getting interviews and stuff on the podcast. I don't always get to do it as often as I would like, but now that I've got the kind of tech working my end, I'm hoping I'm going to be doing it a little more regularly. I've had people in the past, asking why I don't host the podcast with somebody else or have a new guest on every week, and the honest answer is I would absolutely love to do that. The reality of it is trying to put out a podcast once a week for I think we're coming up to the 3rd anniversary of PTCG Radio. I think, in the very near future, the next month or so, or next couple of months, it's going to be 3 years since I started this bad boy. And to be perfectly honest with you, I can't do it once a week, 48 weeks of the year, and have it hosted with someone else. It's just not possible. I did see a plan somebody put on a Facebook group recently, or a little while ago now, that they were going to do a weekly podcast with 2 of them. Loves the people that jumped to my defense saying, hang on a second, we've already got a weekly Pokemon podcast. I've yet to hear anything from them, and if they are going to start doing it, I'm going to guarantee they're going to do it less weeks than I, not because they're any worse than me, but because it's really difficult unless you spend every waking hour with somebody, and that's just weird. So going into the news for this week, we have a few new cards which have come about, a few which bear talking about. The problem is the translations are a little bit off. So we've got an Altaria with Delta Revolution, which allows you to evolve right up the turn you put it into play, and it's got an ability that we don't know what it does. Now, it only does 30 damage for 1 double colourless energy, which isn't a particularly good attack, and it's a colourless Pokemon, so it's not even going to be hitting anyone for weakness. It's maxing out at 30 damage, because since the SP era, we've not actually had anything that's weak to colourless. Although back then we had a bit of a colourless war. Maybe they're giving us a bit of a break. So maybe the ability's awesome, and the fact that it's got Delta Evolution so that you can get it, it's a stage 1, you can get it into play in 1 turn with Delta Evolution. Maybe the ability makes it worth playing, but the reality is we don't know. And there's a couple of EXs, but first let's have a very, very quick look at Reshiram. It's got an ability called Turbo Blaze, and it reads that once during your turn before you attack, if Reshiram is active, you can choose a fire energy from your hand and attach it to one of your dragon Pokemon in play. Now, that means that it is limited to once per turn because he's got to be active. However, we all remember CMT. Well, actually, I say we all remember it. We may or may not. That was a deck with which I grinded into Worlds, and a lot of people have done very well at a lot of tournaments in the past, and it revolved around Celebi Prime, which was, like the Reshiram, a Pokemon that had it was a Poké Power back in the day, but an equivalent of what would be an ability nowadays, whereby if it was active, you could attach an energy to your bench Pokemon. Now, what you could do is have, 2 Reshiram out, and then you can use Switch or Escape Rope or even something like Caldeo to switch between them. And that is going to, allow you to attach multiple energies per turn. That's one thing that you can do. Now, it might be translated in the UK as it can only be used once per turn. So you would never be able to, reuse it no matter how many times you got the Reshiram active. But as it's written at the moment, it's the old Celebi ruling, which is as many different times as you can get different Reshirams into the active, you can be attaching energy to your benched Pokemon, which is quite nice indeed. I say the Celebi ruling, I only ever used it for 1 energy per turn, but I believe you'd be able to use it for more. As always, we're going to need judge rulings for this, like we do for all the new cards, but it just says if this Pokemon is your active, you may choose a fire energy from your hand and attach it to one of your dragon Pokemon in play. And that's kind of like the whole execute ruling. The execute being, if it's in your discard pile, you get to bring it out, but you can discard it and bring it back multiple times, because when it goes to your discard pile, it's a different Pokemon. Kind of like how, if, for argument's sake, you use Cabalion's Iron Breaker against an active EX so they can't attack, all you need to do is switch out to a free retreat Pokemon retreat, and even though the exact same EX is now in the active, it's counted as a different EX, and the effect of Iron Breaker would no longer apply. We're going to need a ruling on that, but you'll notice that Dragon Pokemon have never really been particularly well used, and one of the problems and one of the reasons it hasn't been well used, or they haven't been well used, is because their attacks have been way too expensive. And maybe Reshiram, and it is a dragon Pokemon, maybe Reshiram is a Pokemon that can start making dragon type Pokemon relevant again. Now, it's also got an attack, does 110 damage for 2 fire and lightning and a single colorless. No one's going to want to use that. Speaking of Dragon-type Pokemon that may wish to use Reshiram, we have a look at the Mega Rayquaza EX. Now, I told you there was a Dragon Mega Rayquaza that does 300 damage, but we couldn't really read it. We have a better look. And for 3 fire, 1 lightning, and 1 colorless, it does 300 damage, and you have to discard 2 energy. Now, and again, this is a Japanese translation we've got at the moment. It just says discard 2 energy. So in theory, if you put a double colorless on him, you could just discard the double colorless in the same way that some people, and it's not really done much anymore, but some people in the past with Genesect have actually just attached a double colorless energy and discarded it, every turn to keep the free energy on Genesect and to allow yourself to G-booster every turn. In theory, you could do that with Mega Rayquaza. And this obviously leads to the fairly obvious question of how you're going to get 5 energy on him. Now, the one which people immediately have been coming up with is Emboar. Treat it essentially like Black Kyurem and Blastoise. But here's the thing. Not that many Megas are seeing play at the moment. You can still do 200 damage for 4 energy, that's 1 less, with Black Kyurem EX. And the thing is, nobody's playing that at the moment. Nobody's playing Blastoise with Black Kyurem. Not since we had to get rid of Tropical Beach. So why they would play a card which takes an extra energy and needs to Mega Evolve, but can one-hit KO Megas which aren't that well played at the moment, I'm not entirely sure that's going to happen. So I don't see this as great as some people. Now, a slightly potentially better build is using the Reshiram we've just spoken about, and Mega Turbo, the trainer which allows you to attach a basic energy from your discard to one of your Mega EXs. And I think a combination of them could potentially help you to get the energy on him fast enough. Honestly, I think like pretty much all the EXs I talked about last week, it's too expensive to really be relevant. And the last one which we need to mention, and again I'm afraid it's a little bit underwhelming, is Mega Latios EX. It does Sonic Ace for a Water, a Psychic, and a Colorless, discard 2 energy, and it does 120 to a benched Pokemon. Now, to any Pokemon, but that includes the bench. Mr. Mime blocks it, the stadium, which I've forgotten the name of, blocks it, and it's just not terribly great. I mean, if you read, there's better Pokemon to do 120 damage, and you can just bring it active with Lysandra anyway, so I'm not a huge fan of Mega Latios EX, I'm afraid. In fact, I'm not a huge fan of any of these new cards, but then again, you never know. Altaria could have a game-breaking ability that could make me want to play it a little bit more. I suppose, ladies and gentlemen, we shall have to wait and see. So this past weekend, I went out to my first tournament that I've played in quite a while, since Cornwall Regionals were back at the tail end of last year. And I knew, before I even went down, I knew I was going to end up missing the first 2 rounds, or I was likely to miss the first 2 rounds. And the reason for that was I was getting a sofa delivered, which is a depressingly grown-up reason to be late to a tournament. Now, for anyone wondering, yes, I got my sofa. Yes, my sofa's amazing. But that did leave me in the awkward predicament of I turned up midway through round 2. Now, it was a 5-round cities, and I'd already missed the first 2 rounds, and that counts as 2 game losses. A rule which I'm assuming a lot of you are familiar with, but I suppose you might not be. If you have any losses due to lateness, you are automatically at the bottom of the standings. What I mean by that is, if I was lucky enough to finish 3-2 by winning my 3 remaining games, I would be sitting on 9 points. The same as anyone else that was 3-2 or that was 2-0-3. And I would automatically be the lowest ranked person with 9 points, regardless of what my opponent's win percentage actually was, the thing which usually counts as a tiebreaker. So the only way I could possibly cut is if 7 or less people other than myself got to 3 wins, and I won all 3 of my games. And that is, of course, incredibly unlikely. So I wasn't under a huge amount of pressure, and I've been, over Twitter and over this podcast, I've been talking about how much I love Excadrill. So I put my money where my mouth is, and I took Seismitoad Excadrill out this past weekend. And I'm going to be honest with you, I had a lot of fun playing the deck. It's exactly what it sounds like on the tin. You play Seismitoad with your DCE and your Muscle Band and your Laser Verbank, and your general plan for the game is you want to be Quaking Punch for 50 and using Laser with a Verbank out. The difference to standard Seismitoad lists is that you're not really playing you're not playing Garbodor, and you've got to cut your luxuries like Enhanced Hammer and Headringer, but you're playing Excadrill instead. Now, I ran a full 4-4 list of Excadrill, and I'm not entirely sure that was needed. But it was a fun little deck. I may do a deck breakdown of it, but regardless, within the next week or so, I'll be putting up a video which I played with that deck against, I think it was Landorus Bats I played against on PTCGO. So even if I don't do a deck breakdown, there'll be a video showing how it worked. So, I start off at 0-2, and I know I'm going to be starting against an 0-2. The other thing was, I didn't know, but I would like to do well, because I knew I was going to be playing against people who were going in with poor records, people who had hit bad luck or had made a poor metagame call, or who had, not been, made some mistakes. People who, for some reason or another, had lost their first 2 games. Or maybe I'd be paired up against a 0-1-1 with 0 wins and 1 draw. So I start off, and I am playing Andy Morehouse, father of perennial top cutter Ryan Morehouse, and all-round lovely chap. And he's playing Seismitoad Garbodor. And we start off, I'm going second, and game 1 I hit a huge piece of luck, because he starts off with, I believe he had a Jirachi or something active. He had something active which he didn't want in the active, and which stopped him, getting the Quaking Punch off. What that meant was I was getting the early Quaking Punch, and then like every Seismitoad mirror match, we ended up trading Quaking Punches. The thing was, he also started with a Trubbish on his bench, and he then evolved it to a Garbodor, and I Lysandra'd up the Garbodor. He didn't have a tool on it because he was under Trainer Lock, and that essentially gave me 2 turns without Trainer Lock. 1 turn without Trainer Lock. I Lysandra'd it up, did 50, Garbodor has a retreat cost of 3, and my opponent is Trainer Locked, so I know it's going to be up there the next turn. That gives me a turn with Trainers, and it gives me an easy prize. That means that I get to make sure that all of my Pokemon have tools on them, and it means I get my lasers and all back, and it was just, and like I say, he started with his Jirachi, so that basically made me start 2 prizes up before we even got going. And I won game 1 fairly easily, but only because I hit, he started with Jirachi, which is a terrible starter. What I did like was that my deck got Seismitoad out very, very quickly, which I was hoping that it would, and that Excadrill kind of did its job. And this was what I saw throughout the day with Excadrill. He's not really your main attacker in a Seismitoad Excadrill list. You end up sitting behind Seismitoad, building your Excadrills on the bench, and then when you need to take prizes, you can. The annoying thing was, however, that's one of the great things about Excadrill, is that you can do 160 if you have a silver bangle attached, 50 plus 30 twice, and then you can play a laser, without Verbank for 170 or with Verbank for 190, getting 1-hit KOs on EXs. Because I spent pretty much the entire game trainer locked, I wasn't able to do this. I suppose it's also worth noting that I had a floating space in my deck going into the tournament. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to borrow Verbanks, so I had 1, I couldn't find another 2. I was playing free at the time. So I was thinking about what to put in its stead, and I was thinking about maybe putting in 1 Manectric with a lightning energy to do a bit of bench damage for if Excadrill does 160 and is thwarted. Or maybe putting in a couple of Headringers or a couple enhanced hammers to make it more like my old Seismitoad deck, or maybe even putting in a 1-1 Garbodor line. And then as I was driving to the tournament, I was thinking about the deck, and one of the things I realised about Seismitoad is it becomes infinitely more powerful when you don't have to dredge, i.e. when you've got free energy on and can just actually attack twice, and when you've got a Silver Bangle or a Muscle Band attached. And I was going in with my deck playing 2 of each. So I resolved that if I wasn't able to borrow any Verbank City Gym, I'd just up it to free Silver Bangle and free Muscle Band. And I was playing, I think, a max potion with the floating space. As it turns out, I know too many lovely people. The lovely Terry Goodacre managed to lend me a couple of Verbanks. Thank you very much to him. But I used that floating space in my deck. I got rid of the random max potion, which was also potentially going to be a Lissandra's trump card, and I stuck in a 3rd Muscle Band instead. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is basically to point out that if you want to play Excadrill, you need those tools. It was a brilliant play. And a brilliant choice, although not, I'm not saying I was some kind of clairvoyant. I'm saying that it worked out for the best, regardless of my reasons for playing it. I was thinking about playing a 1 Manectric, 1 Lightning. So we end up in game 2, and the reason I told you about the Muscle Band is because it came relevant here. Essentially, I started off going second again. He gets a Seismitoad active with a double colourless energy, but he whiffs the Muscle Band. I then start with an Excadrill, and I have a Ultra Ball to get a Seismitoad out. I start with a Drillbur, of course, because he's the basic. And I've got a Juniper, and I've got a Computer Search. And I need the Switch DCE in order to trainer lock him, or else he's going to have a turn where he can put on all of his tools, and he's going to have, he's going to be able to do a lot of damage, because his deck did play Crushing Hammer and Enhanced Hammer and Headringer and all of that good stuff. And so I popped down a Verbank, which I also had in my hand, and I used the Computer Search to get a DCE because I had 4 of them to free switches. And I got rid of the energy, which was a risky play, because then if I didn't draw into any energy, I'd just given up an energy drop. And off the Juniper, I managed to hit my DCE. I'd hit the DCE off the Computer Search. I managed to hit the Switch, and the Laser, and the Muscle Band to go with a Verbank, and that was basically game right there. I was Quaking Punch for 50, whereas he was Quaking Punch for 30, and he was poisoned and taking 30 poison damage a turn, and he never really recovered from there. And that's basically as fickle as the Seismitoad mirror matchup is. That's what it comes down to. In round 2, I'm playing against Jack Broom, and he's playing Kyurem Manectric. This is very good for me. He's playing the Plasma Kyurem, which has 130 HP and is weak to metal. So all I need to do is get a Muscle Band on my Excadrill, and I can actually dredge and then get the 1-hit KO, because I'm doing 70 times 2, which is 140, 10 more than Kyurem has. Or I can even KO 2 in 1 turn if I've already got free energy on it. As it turns out, he drew fairly dead both games, so they were 2 fairly quick wins. But one thing I do want to point out, which an awful lot of people have missed with Excadrill, the attack goes through resistance. So there's an awful lot of people that haven't realised that. You go through resistance with Excadrill, make it known. So I'm sitting at 2-2 and I'm feeling pretty good and I'm doing quite well. But, the honest answer is that I know I'm not going to cut anyway. So, it doesn't really matter. And I go into round 3 and I am playing, I forget his first name, I do apologise, but Mr. Taylor, Sam Taylor's dad, not the perennial top cutter. If you're listening, Sam, I'm sorry. If you're not listening, I'm not. And he's playing Virizion Genesect, and I don't like Virizion Genesect. It's not a great matchup. But I don't know why, this was the one tournament I was actually hitting a little bit of luck. Despite starting and not being able to cut, I'm hitting all my luck. Game 1, we start off, and he starts his lone Deoxys, which gives me 4 turns of Quaking Punching, because he's not playing DCE, so it's going to take him 2 energy attachments to retreat the Deoxys, and he can't play Switch or anything like that because he's trainer locked. And I don't even bother playing a laser here. I want to take as long to kill it as possible. Well, not as long, but 4 turns, because it's going to take him 4 energy attachments to attach the Deoxys and retreat and get the 2 energy onto Virizion in order to Emerald Slash. So not only do I get several turns to build up my Excadrills on the bench, but I start 2 prizes up. And the game gets very, very close because I am once again unable to use lasers to get 1-hit KOs with Excadrill because Virizion's body turns off special conditions. So of the 3 matches I played, only one of them could I actually use lasers in, which was really disappointing because Excadrill wasn't doing his stuff. And then I'm able to take some big KOs of Excadrill, finish out the game, and, feeling pretty good about myself. Now, one thing that helped is that Sam's dad has not been playing terribly long and didn't play terribly fast, and I was never going to rush him, because I was fully aware that I'm not winning a legitimate best of 3 with these. Now, I'm not deliberately slow playing, that would be wrong, but I am doing everything I can. I'm shuffling up between games like I always do. I'm playing Ultra Balls I don't need to play. I'm Lysandring stuff on his bench, not really to get KOs, but just to force him to spend a turn or 2 attaching energy to retreat it. I'm trying to prolong the game as much as I can, and I'm letting him play at his speed. I'm not hurrying him when I maybe would in a different game state. And I get incredibly lucky once again. Time is called about 5 seconds before he ends his turn. And then if he takes 2 prizes, he wins. Otherwise, and we end up in a draw. Otherwise, I'm winning the series. I've got an Ultra Ball in hand. I look for my 4th Drillbur to pop on my bench with the active Excadrill. He cannot possibly take 2, kill both of them in 1 turn. I'm going to get the win. My last Drillbur's prize. But I don't say this as a kind of, ooh, woe is me, I'm so unlucky, because at the end of the day, I hadn't taken any prizes this game. So it was moderately likely one of them was going to end up, there's like a 50% chance, just under, that one of them was going to be prize starting the game. So I end up popping a Seismitoad on the bench because he is going to KO the Excadrill. I don't want to get benched next turn. And then I wait, and it literally comes down to, if he gets a Plasma Energy, he's going to win the game and we're going to tie the match. If he whiffs the Plasma Energy, we're not going to be able to do anything. We're going to sit there and I'm going to win the series, the match 1-0. Because I've had to bench a Seismitoad, and Seismitoad gets KO'd very easily by Genesect. He plays a Chorus to 5, whiffs the Plasma Energy, although he had over half his deck left and only 1 left in the deck. So statistically, he should have whiffed it. And I end up winning an illegitimate series, because at the end of that second game, I had a Seismitoad and 6 prizes remaining. He had a fully set up Virizion Genesect with 2 Genesects with free energy on and 1 prize remaining. Literally, if time had been called 5 seconds later, he'd have had an extra turn and it would have been, game over. Hey ho, what can you do? So I finished 3-2 and I finished 11th place out of 30 Masters as the lowest ranked chap with 9 points, and that makes perfect sense. And I'm feeling pretty good. I win a set of sleeves in the raffle, which pays my entry fee when I sell them to the aforementioned lovely chap Terry Goodacre, and I pull a full art teammates in my participation pack. Quite frankly, a good day all round. But the weird thing at this particular tournament was the top 8. Now, as I said, it didn't include me. It couldn't have included me. But in the top 8, we saw Tamal Cameron's Executor deck beat Alex Dow's Tool Drop deck. Luke Kirkham's Night March beating Ben Hall's Aromatisse box, we see Ryan Morehouse's Fighting Bats deck, Landorus, Hawlucha, Crobat, beat Dan Middleton, Celebrity Dan Middleton's Speed Lugia deck. That's apparently still a thing. And Reese Williams' Mewtwo Bats beat Charlie Powell's Tool Drop. So in the top 8 here, and these are all very good players. It was a 30 Masters, which is fairly moderately high for a UK cities, and several Worlds qualifiers. Tamau, Luke, Alex, Ryan, Charlie. These are all people that have played at Worlds, most of them multiple times. And we've got 2 Tool Drop, a Night March, an Executor, 2 Crobat decks, an Aromatisse, and a Speed Lugia. That's the top 8. Now, going into the top 4, Reese's Fighting Bats beat out Luke's Night March, and Tamau's Executor beat Ryan's Fighting Bats. And I'm going to try and get the final up on the stream, so I'm not going to tell you who actually won the tournament. But what I do want to point out is that Execute made the final, or Executor. And this was an amazing deck. The other decks you should know a little bit about. But Executor made the final of a fairly important cities. Now, he was the 8th seed going in of a record of 3-2, same as I. But he still managed to get, all the way to the final. He still managed to beat a Tool Drop and a Fighting Bats deck to get into the final. And as we're going to see from Florida Regionals, Fighting Bats is a deck that people need to start taking very, very seriously indeed. And this deck is genius. Essentially, there is an Executor, which has an attack for a colourless energy, which does 10 damage and stops you playing supporters. Now, the way my lovely friend Luke Kirkham, who's going to be on the podcast in a little bit, the way he phrased it was essentially, imagine all those games where you've lost because you didn't draw a supporter. Now imagine that's every game, and you never draw one. That's essentially what Executor does. Now, the weird thing about this was the kind of engine Tamau played. He played Acrobike, one of the very few Primal Clash cards I saw at the tournament this weekend. And he played an awful lot of trainers, Crushing Hammer, Enhanced Hammer, he played Laser and Verbank, and the general theory was he's just going to put a Muscle Band down to hit for 30 a turn. He's going to play a Laser, so he hits for another 30 between turns with the Verbank, and he's going to block you using supporters so you never draw anything. And I watched a couple of his games, and hopefully we're going to have them on my YouTube channel. I'll let you know when they're up there. Check my Twitter, @TheWassy. I will be posting on there when they're up. And obviously I'm mentioning it on the podcast, but that'll be the Wednesday after they're up. And not only are you sitting there poisoned, taking 30 damage a turn, not able to play supporters, but every energy you put on is being taken off you. It is excruciating to watch, and it's brilliant. And then at pretty much every 2 or 3 turns, he plays Lissandra's Last Resort, or Lissandra's Trump card, whatever it's actually called in this country, to reset his deck and go over again. He was basically lasering every single turn. And he was hammering every energy that was put out. It was a thing of beauty to behold. The other genius thing, of course, is that the Execute, although only 30 HP and very weak, has an ability which allows you to bring it from the discard pile into your hand. So he was using Battle Compressor to discard 3 of these, and then just bring them all into his hand and bench them, like Pokemon Collector, Pokemon Fan Club, but for free Pokemon, in a trainer. It was a beautifully made deck. It's going to make more sense if I pop the video of it on the stream up on my YouTube channel, so I will be doing that hopefully in the fairly near future. But it was just a brilliant deck, brilliantly piloted. I loved seeing it get to the final. It was a thing of beauty. Like I said, if you want to know who won the final, it's going to be going up on my YouTube, hopefully in the moderately near future. And that brings us to Florida Regionals. Now, thank you to Andrew Wambolt, who went up on Burbank City Gym, the Pokemon Facebook group, and he put all the results up there for the world to see. What I've done is I've done my usual thing. I've dug through these results and I've tried to kind of draw conclusions and analyse them, and hopefully I'll be giving you something a little bit more from Florida Regionals than you've seen from the other people out there. So I'm only going to worry about the top 32 for the time being, and I've gone through and I've listed the top 32 decks. And the most popular deck was fighting bats, Landorus, Horlicher, Crobat. Although one of them is listed as not being played with Crobat, so, take that or leave it. But 10 Landorus bats made it into the top 32. That's basically 1 in 3 decks that made the top 32 at a large regionals is fighting bats. That's huge. 7 Seismitoad decks. Most of them were Garbodor, but there was 1 played with Slurpluff and 1 played with Crobat. So you're talking kind of 5 Garbodor, 1 Slurpluff, 1 Bat. And you could count that as 8 Seismitoad lists if you include the Seismitoad Eviltown. There were 4 Eviltown Garbodor, or 3 because one of them didn't have Garbodor, it was Eviltown Seismitoad. 4 Night March. 3 Primal Groudon, 1 played with Focus Sash to stop it being one-hit KO to help against things like Vrizzy and Genesect, and 1 with Masquerain. Now, Focus Sash makes sense. It stops Primal Groudon being one-hit KO'd. It makes perfect sense. It helps against your worst matchup, which is Vrizzy and Genesect, and anything else that might come along and try and one-hit KO you. Masquerain, on the other hand, it's a beautiful card. And it's basically a Stage 1 Pokemon with an ability that allows you to rearrange the tools on your own field. It means that your Groudon, or even your Primal Groudon, can't be head-ringed or jamming netted, because tools do affect them. And it means you can put something like you can put the Spirit Link onto Groudon to evolve without losing a turn, and then you can switch it out for a Focus Sash, or for a Muscle Band, or for whatever you wish to do. So really quite ingenious playing Groudon with Masquerain. I would like some information about how they accelerated, whether they used Landorus, or hid behind Robo Substitute, or used Victini EX. We went through the options on the podcast last week. So I'd like to see a bit more detail about that. But it's interesting that 3 Primal Groudon made top 32. We then saw 3 Flareon decks and 1 Empoleon Miltank Dusknoir. Here's what's interesting though. There were no Virizion and Genesect that made top 32. The decks that I've listed here are the decks that people played to make top 32. Then it went into expanded and people had the opportunity to change their deck. So 10 Landorus Bats, 7 Seismitoad, 4 Eviltown Garbodor, 4 Night March, 3 Primal Groudon, 3 Flareon, and 1 Empoleon Miltank Dusknoir. Fairly interesting. But, it doesn't really go against what we thought. Landorus Bats, fighting bats, has been growing in popularity for a while now, so it's hardly completely unforeseen that should be coming out and doing well. Seismitoad's been good for ages. Eviltown Garbodor's been good for ages. The top 3, we're not really particularly worried about, because we saw them coming. This isn't unexpected information. The one thing which I do find interesting is the fact that these were the first tournaments where Primal Clash was legal. And there was an awful lot of people playing it safe, not playing Primal Clash decks. Now, at the cities I was at this past weekend, there were I think 3 people playing the new Mega Gardevoir EX. But there were no Primal Groudon, no Primal Kyogre. I was the only person there playing Excadrill. There weren't even that many Primal Clash cards played. A few Acrobike, a few Teammates, and a few Repeat Ball. That was about all I saw. So, what about the lesser played decks? Primal Groudon, you would expect a few of these to cut, but not that many. And the reason very simply is people are going to play it because it's a new deck, it's the new fun deck. But the list people have are not going to be amazing, and the top players generally stay away from these kind of decks unless they're absolutely convinced, which means they've either settled on a really good list really quickly, or they've waited for it to gain a little bit of popularity because it's doing quite well. So it would have been played a little bit less because of that, but some people would have been playing it for the novelty factor, and that's why it evens out at 3 top cuts out of 32. Night March is the most interesting one on that list for me. This is the one where you've got the Pumpkaboo and you've got the Joltik that do 30 damage times the amount of Pokemon with Night March in your discard pile. And you've got Lampent as well, but you use him just for discarding. Now, it's not a great list, and it's massively outdated, and it's not a deck I'd play nowadays. But I have done a deck breakdown of Night March on my YouTube channel, so a PTCG Radio over on YouTube. So go and check that out. The kind of Flareon, Leafeon stuff's a bit outdated, never really worked. But if you go and check that out, it'll give you more information about the general deck and how it works and all of that good stuff. So, get yourself over to my YouTube channel and see that if you want more information about the deck generally. Nowadays it tends to be played with Mew and Manectric and played a bit more straightforward, which does make more sense. The thing about Night March is it's incredibly weak. Your Pumpkaboo's got 60 HP, or 50, I think it's 60. And your Joltik's got 30 HP, and you might be using a Mew which has got 120 HP and gives up 2 prizes. Essentially, it's got 60 HP. But it's fast. You get a couple Battle Compressor off, and, maybe a Silver Bangle or a Muscle Band or something like that, and you're taking KOs left, right, and centre. It attacks for a double colourless energy. You play Dimension Valley to bring Pumpkaboo down to a double colourless energy, and Joltik's just always a double colourless energy. You bring it against something like Arvorizian Genesect, which is going to take a couple of turns to get going, and it's going to win every time. You bring it against something like Fairies, which takes a couple of turns to get going, and you're going to win every time. Because you're going to be hitting, 90, 120 damage, probably on turn 1, and you're going to be hitting one-hit KOs fairly quickly into the game on EXs. Now, Night March is not all that great. You get against, a decent bats list, and they leave all their EXs in the deck and just fight you with the Crobats, etc. And they're not going to last forever, but you're going to be able to get some easy KOs there, and then, maybe take a double KO with Landorus so it doesn't matter that it gets knocked out next turn. Or, any kind of fast, hard-hitting deck, even something like Speed Lugia, so you're taking, quick and easy prizes, as long as they don't get the Joltik out and hit for weakness. It preys on EX-heavy decks, and this is why 2 Tool Drop were also able to cut the cities I just went to. Same exact theory. Tool Drop does 20 damage times the amount of tools for a single energy if you've got Dimension Valley out, and you can be getting tools down, you can be getting 5 or 6 tools down a turn. And, getting them on the field and doing a huge amount of damage on a basic Pokemon for 1 energy attachment and 1 hit KOing EXs. And this is what Night March and Tool Drop have done. They've taken advantage of the format. They're also cheap as chips to make, which is fantastic. The only EX over both decks is Mew EX, and since they reprinted that in Legendary Treasures, you can pick that up for a couple of quid. Now, they both have weaknesses to Seismitoad. A Seismitoad that plays Startling Megaphone and then just Quaking Punches is going to win pretty much straight away against a Tool Drop deck, and one that plays Lissandra's Trump card and just Quaking Punches is going to win pretty much straight away against a Night March deck. But against, against things like Empoleon or Flareon or decks like that with non-EX attackers that can trade with them, they may well end up, running out of, for Tool Drop, it's going to be running out of Trubbishes. They've only got 4. Although they're going to be playing things like Trump Card or Sacred Ash, but that's still clumsy to try and get them back in a deck and then get them out again. Or getting rid of the DCEs in a Night March deck, so that they can't attack in 1 turn anymore. Or they've then got to use Mew, who with Dimension Valley and a Joltik on the bench can attack for 1 energy, but then gives up 2 prizes easily. So, essentially, these are decks which are easily beaten if you're playing the right kind of cards and the right kind of Pokemon and the right kind of decks. But they prey on EX-heavy decks very easily. Empoleon Miltank Dusknoir, it was a good player with a good list. It's not really statistically relevant that one person did it. As for the free Flareon decks, more on that in a minute. So now I had a look, and one thing I did look at was, I had a quick look to see how many people actually changed their decks between day 1 and day 2. 41%. Or to be more accurate, 40.625%. 13 out of the 32 people who made top 32 played a different deck in top 32. Now, I'm not saying the others didn't change a card or 2 here or there, but they played largely the same deck, at least according to the information I've got. And what that shows is that people essentially are picking decks for the tournament as a whole, or they're not comfortable enough with another deck to go into day 2. And actually, when we look at it, of the people that did switch their decks, only, I think, 2 people, only 2 of the top 8 switched their decks, which is 25%, which is lower than 40, shockingly. So less than the average amount of people change their decks to make top 8. And I'm putting this down to familiarity. We generally do better with decks with which we're familiar, decks that we've practiced well. And changing a deck halfway through isn't a good plan. Now, going into the top 8, we had 3 Eviltal Garbodor, although one was Eviltal Toad, maybe without Garbodor. 2 Landorus Bats, 1 Aromatisse Florges, like Emmanuel played at the ECC, 1 Flareon, and 1 Night March with Empoleon and Archie. And that's the same as the Flareon, Empoleon and Archie, so we'll talk about that in a minute. So we've got a lot of diversity there. What we see is that Landorus Bats is still to be feared, but whereas it was almost 1 in 3 in the regular, going into top 32, it's then dropped to 1 in 4 going into top 8. Eviltal Garbodor, or Eviltal decks, let's call them, 4 of them made top 32, 3 of them made top 8. Now, I've looked at names of some of the players like Justin Sanchez who played this deck, and that former US national champion, and this shows that maybe it was good players playing Eviltal, and certainly I've seen people accusing them of just playing a safe deck, but I think Justin Sanchez ended up second, so if I could play a safe deck and get second at a large regionals in the US, I think I'd take that, quite frankly. So Eviltal, in terms of making it from top 32 into top 8, playing in Expanded, clearly did better than the others. One thing which I did find interesting is of the 3 Groudon that made top 32, only 1 person played Groudon in top 32. 2 of the 3 Groudon players switched away from it in top 32. So even the people that played it well on the day didn't have very much confidence in it going into Expanded. Maybe that's because they assumed more people were going to play Virizion Genesect in Expanded. Who knows? The other things which I find interesting are that none of the 7 Seismitoad Garbodor decks, or Seismitoad Focus decks, made it from top 32 into top cut. Which is weird. Just thought I'd point that out. So yeah, that's kind of my take on all of that. So, it was actually won by Flareon. I think I've told you enough about the kind of decks that won. We're going to do a top decks for states, but I'm going to do my list next week. If you really, really, really want a preview of that to see which decks you should be playing for states earlier to get your testing in, clearly it's Landorus Bats, Seismitoad Garbodor, and Eviltal Garbodor, with an eye on Night March and an eye on Primal Groudon. What I would say is that Landorus Bats and Seismitoad can have very good matchups against Night March. So, if 2 of the 3 best decks should be beating you, I don't think it's a good play. I think Night March was the kind of deck which took really good advantage of the format as it was at the time, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be a great deck going forward. So, something to bear in mind, but nothing to take... I was going to say take too seriously, and that sounds really rude, but Night March is one of those decks that does amazingly when nobody's prepared, and not amazingly when people are prepared. And I really think it's going to be very easy for good players with decks like Landorus Bats to go and beat Night March. So, sorry about that. Now, the only other thing I really want to talk about today is this Flareon deck. Now, Matt Blower, lovely chap, judge in the UK, good friend, etc. He watched the stream of Florida Regionals and he claims to have worked out the exact list. Now, I'm working off the list he's given me, but there was also a video that surfaced of a YouTube channel in Japan with somebody playing a very similar deck, although it played Vaporeon, so it's not the exact same deck. And I've seen how the deck runs. So even if it's not exactly right, it's largely right. As for people claiming Matt shouldn't have posted this deck out in public, it's been on the stream. People have seen the deck. It's no longer a secret. It's not like he's going to nick someone's deck list and put it up on the internet. He's watched the same stream everybody else has and put the deck list up there. He's helped out the people that were going to work it out anyway, and anyone that really wanted to play this deck would just watch the stream and work out their own list anyway. So, it plays essentially the only 2 major attackers are Flareon and Leafeon. Flareon doing 20 damage plus 10 for each Pokemon in the discard for DCE. Leafeon doing 20 damage times the amount of energy attached to all of your offenders' Pokemon for a colourless energy. And that really is it. It plays a 1-1 Slurpluff line to help you draw cards. It plays 2 Execute to help you to use Empoleon's ability, more on him in a minute. and, just help you with discarding. A couple of Aldino to get rid of special conditions and get more Pokemon in the discard pile for Flareon. 2 Jirachi, because it plays very few supporters. 4 Juniper, 1 N, and 1 Archie. More on that in a minute. And a couple of Ditto, which can be evolved into your Eevee or your Swirlix or your Jirachi, etc. Really, the Dittos are just used as 2 extra Eevees, because you can put an Eevee down, and the Eevees are one you can immediately evolve by attaching an energy. Now, the weird thing here is that it's playing 2 Water Energy, 1 Grass, and 4 DCE. So, you're not really using Eevee's ability all that much. And it's only actually plays 1 Eevee with the ability for that exact reason. You're only playing 1 Grass Energy. You're probably never going to get it going. But it's the engine which interests me. It plays 4 Battle Compressor, and this gets your Empoleon in the discard pile, and it gets your Execute in the discard pile, and it gets your supporters in the discard pile, because it plays 3 VS Seeker, which of course helps massively. It also plays 4 Acro Bike, which gets other stuff in the discard pile, because again, you want your Pokemon in the discard pile for Flareon. You want the Empoleon in the discard pile for Archie. You want your Execute in the discard pile. So playing 4 Battle Compressor, 4 Acro Bike, this is a deck that really works out of the discard pile, between Execute and between Archie with your Empoleon, and between the Flareon. It is really working out of the discard pile. Now this Archie card, it's the one which basically allows you to play it if it's the only card in your hand, put a water Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench, and draw 5 cards. And this allows you to play Empoleon essentially as a basic. So there's 2 Empoleon in the deck, but there's no Piplup and there's no Prinplup. You use it for its ability and you use it for its attack. 10 damage times the amount of Pokemon in play. And it's got an ability which allows you to discard a card from your hand and draw 2 cards. And you can either discard Pokemon to help build up Flareon, or you can just bring up an Execute from the bench and discard that. So it essentially allows you to draw 2 cards for free. Now, in terms of the engine, it's a very innovative deck. Although, like I said, there are videos floating around of it being played in Japan, so I'm not going to get into the who invented it argument. But the fact that it kind of only plays 5 supporters makes me nervous. It plays 2 Jirachi to help you get your supporters out. And it plays Battle Compressor, Acro Bike, and VS Seeker to, like I say, essentially play from the discard pile. I think there's going to be a bunch of games where, essentially all that happens is you sit there with no supporter and lose, especially if your opponent gets out an early Garbodor. There are no startling Megaphone in this deck, so if your opponent gets out a Garbodor, you ain't ever using Jirachi. And they can do that as early as turn 2 after you've had a single turn. Similarly, if your opponent plays Wobbuffet, say in the Mewtwo Bats deck people are using, then you're not going to be able to use Jirachi either. And if you can't use Jirachi, and you've only got 6 draw supporters, one of which is an incredibly hard to use Archie, you're going to have games where you draw a bit dead. Not only that, but you've got a lot of low HP Pokemon. I could easily see this getting stomped by something like Landorus Bass. You're not hitting for weakness until you get the Empoleon out. And between the Mr. Mime, the Ditto, the Jirachis, of which there's probably going to be at least 1 on the bench, the Slurpluff, the Flareon, the Eevees, these are all really low HP Pokemon. And plus, of course, the Ditto and the Eevees being weak to fighting, it's not going to take too much for a fast-going off Landorus Bats deck to just take this apart in a few turns. And if you look at the attackers, it's got a 4/4 Flareon/Leafeon line, and 2 Empoleon, which can only be got out the deck using Archie, and you can only use Archie if you've got it in your hand, and you've got the only card in your hand, and there's only 1 Archie in the deck. Now you've got VS Seeker and you've got Jirachi to help you get the Archie out. This is a deck which is going to take an awful lot of testing to really get your skill level to the stage where you're going to be able to play this well. And there's an awful lot of people talking about how great it is and how they're going to play it. But I think a warning should be coming with this deck. And that is, it's going to be really easy to misplay this deck. It's going to be really easy to not get all your stuff sorted and get set up with this deck. and it's a kind of deck where you are going to play a few games and lose fairly early. Now, I've got a few YouTube videos backed up to be put up. We've got my Excadrill deck list. We've got, hopefully, the games from the cities this past week. We've got my top 10 list of cards from Primal Clash. And we've got the game I played against Landorus Bats with Seismitoad, Excadrill. If you really want to see a deck breakdown of this list, hit me up on Twitter at @TheWassy. Email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. If I get some time, I may be able to stick up a deck breakdown of this deck and a game or two with it. But the YouTube channel, shall we say, it's a little bit backed up at the moment with content needing to go up there. So I can't promise it's going to be up there too soon. Do check the YouTube channel. Like I said, that deck breakdown's going up today, and there's other stuff going to be going up in the near future. Check my Twitter at @TheWassy for more details. And now that I've run you through the cities and my list, I've told you all about Executor. I've told you loads about Excadrill. I've taken you through Florida Regionals. I've explained why Night March is potentially good but won't be for too much longer. And I've taken you all the way through that Flareon deck. I think that's probably enough for 1 week. I'm going to sign off now, and I'm going to leave you with the interview I recorded with the lovely Luke Kirkham, who's got some really interesting stuff to say about Mewtwo Bats, about his performance at the ECC with Manectric, and about his performance at the weekend. He was one of the 2 Night March decks which made it into top cut. Ended up top 4 in the end. So have a listen to this. Thank you very much for listening. Look after yourselves till next week. My name's Ross, and you've been listening, and hopefully for about 10-15 minutes will still be listening to PTCG Radio. Alright, I am joined this week by Mr. Luke Kirkham, who, if I remember correctly, is sitting on 445 championship points, looking like a decent bet to maybe get one of the 22 paid invites from Europe, coming off, shockingly, another top cut this past weekend. How you doing, Luke?
I'm not too bad, thanks. Not too bad.
Sweet. Now, first thing, I think the thing we need to start on this week is your recent success at the ECC. Tell us about the ECC, because I misrepresented your deck on the podcast like a terrible man. So tell us what you played, tell us how you went, tell us about your ECC experience.
So I played all throughout the cities leading up to ECC. I played a Manectric variant where it was just basically the premise of the deck is Manectric with a tool on your opponent, whether it be your own head ringers or a tool of their own, plus Laser Verbank, hits 170 for 2 energy. So you can take sort of quick prizes turn 2 and get sort of powerful knockouts with it. I played it with Mega Manectric, only just the one, and Zapdos because Donphan was a really bad matchup, and also Mewtwo just because Mewtwo just a universally good attacker against most things because it's double colourless and bang hits them for whatever they're going for. So leading up to the ECC, I've been playing that, and I cut sort of 5 or 6 cities in a row with it. I was on a bit of a roll, and then leading up to the ECC, however, I realised that there's a few matchups that I would struggle with. So I decided to cut out a few things like the Mega, cut out Spiritomb, cut out Zapdos, and just then left it with Seismitoad, Manectric, Garbodor. And I did leave one Mewtwo in because, again, I think he's just a good attacker in a deck that uses DCE and lasers. But I just felt it was consistent. They didn't have any real bad matchups other than Donphan. I know some people will argue that having 2 Toads, you've got a chance against Donphan, but it's only a good chance if you start Quaking Punch sort of turn 1 or turn 2 and put them under lock straight away. But yeah, that's what I went for, and that's how it came about. We did a bit of testing the night before, and a friend of mine sort of said, put Garb in, cut all the other crap, let's go for it. And I was contemplating it, and then I just thought the ECC would be safer bet because I thought Virgin seems to be quite popular across Europe, so I thought I'd give it a go.
Sweet. Now, you made it through to the top 32 at the ECC, if I remember correctly. What was your record at the end of day 1?
At the end of day 1, it was 6-1-2.
And so 1 loss, couple of draws. What were you finding the matchups? Were they as expected? Was anything causing you more grief than you thought? Or was the kind of the testing and the theory working out as you'd hoped?
It was. It was a bit frustrating because round 1 there was a bit of a delay to the start, and obviously the one matchup I wanted to try and avoid as much as I can was Donphan. Round 1, as my opponent turned over his first card, it was a Fanfi, and I thought, here we go, it's going to be one of those days. I managed to get a tie out of that one, and then again in round 3, I played another Donphan, and that was my only loss for the day on that day. But I was quite fortunate because at one point I was 2-1-2, so I had to win 4 on the bounce to get in, and luckily I had some fairly decent matchups and got a good run going and managed to squeeze in. I think it was around 15th seed.
Excellent. So getting through without IDing, which will always make you look better in my books. So I was talking about this with Nick on last week's podcast, and we were talking about the fact that this is the only tournament in Europe where we actually have the Day 2 top 32 5 rounds. Had you worked out going into Day 2 how many you needed to win in order to actually make the top 8?
Yeah, but we didn't have the exact figures. We sort of based it on what made it in last year from top 8. And so we settled on around 30 points would be required to get me in, which would mean I needed to around 29, 30 points. Because I think it was the year before, it was around 28 points, and we just thought it'd be one more because I think there was a few more people this year. So I worked out that I needed to ideally win 3 of my 5 games on Day 2.
And how did Day 2 go in the end? How many did you win? How many did you lose? Any draws thrown in the mix?
No draws. I won 3 and lost 2.
Excellent. That put you into top 8 as the 8th seed. And tell us what you faced in top 8.
I faced Donphan.
And yet you got through.
I did, yes. I was quite fortunate in my top 8 matchup. Both games, I got a turn 1 or turn 2, whether I went first or second Quaking Punch. And he played an unusual build where he focused on Donphan and Wobbuffet, because I think he expected a lot of Vision Genesect, and obviously Wobbuffet is quite good in that matchup. So, I was quite fortunate. I got Quaking Punch off, and he just drew nothing. I mean, game 2, I had a bit of a panic because I Ultra Balled to get a Toad out, and as I did my deck check, I realised that basically I have 3 attackers in that matchup: 2 Toad and 1 Mewtwo, and 1 Toad and 1 Mewtwo was prized. So there was a momentary panic, but I didn't need more than the 1 Toad. I just got Quaking Punch, and he just didn't get anything going.
That's always a nice bonus. And then, unfortunately, if I believe correctly, the dream died in top 4. What happened, Luke?
It did indeed. I lost to the eventual winner in Nicholas. He won game 1 quite comfortably. I started Toad against his Vision Genesect. Game 2, I started Toad, but I managed to get Headringer and Quaking Punch off, and he just didn't get much going, so I managed to sort of build up a bench and get a Garbodor out on that one. So it was again, fairly comfortable in my way. He scooped quite early on. Game 3 was frustrating. He had a Vision and a Genesect out. He couldn't get much else out, and both of them had about 150 damage on by his sort of last turn of time. But I just couldn't get any more Pokemon out. I played a few Junipers and a few other supporters, and I just could not get anything else out. So I got benched, unfortunately, for the game.
It does suck, but it's one better than me last year, and it was, top 4 is always good. We need a Brit winning the ECC in the near future because we keep getting annoyingly close.
We do indeed, yeah. I think the last 3 years we've had, I think you last year top 8 and Tamal the year before top 4, then myself this year top 4, so we're getting close but not quite there.
We will do it one day. Now, what surprised me was I was looking through Facebook a little bit after the ECC, and I believe you won a city with a completely different deck, despite having, like you say, played the same deck for quite some time.
Yeah, for the cities after the ECC, I felt like I played Manectric for sort of 6-7 cities and the ECC, and obviously ECC was a long weekend. I think it worked out at about 16 rounds over 2 days, so I felt like I played that deck enough. I wanted to play something a bit more fun, a bit different, and sort of a bit more enjoyable, I guess. I played Mewtwo Bats. As you remember, earlier in the season I played a straight Mewtwo deck which focused on Psy Drive.
I do remember.
And it's basically a similar concept to that, except for you can hit one-hit KOs with the damage from the Bats line. So it was a powerful deck. It was a lot stronger than I expected. I expected to play it a bit of fun and put this together. I did a little bit of testing the night before, and it came out quite strong in testing, so I thought I'd go in with it, and it was very strong. There was quite a lot of Fairy on the day, because obviously ECC Fairy deck got quite a lot of spotlight with Emmanuel and Alex playing it, and it seemed to have a strong match up in that match.
Excellent. So it's the one where you've got the Dimension Valley allowing Mewtwo to side drive for just 2 energy, combined with Wobbuffet to block abilities and wrap up KOs. And then, of course, you've got the bats as well. And with Mewtwo hitting 140 with a Muscle Band, all it takes is a couple of Crobats to hit for 180 in total.
Indeed, yeah.
Which can be done as early as second turn of the game. So let's flash forward to this past weekend then. You went in with another different deck, and I believe you made it all the way to top 4. I was sceptical when I saw what you were playing, although when I turned up you were 2-0, so I probably shouldn't have complained too much. What did you play this week, Luke?
I played Night March.
And what kind of Night March was it? A lot of people are playing it with kind of Manectric and all of that stuff. Was it a fairly straightforward list? Did you have Manectric? Did you have Mew?
Yeah, it was. It had Mew in it. There was no real sort of flamboyant text or anything like that. I just kept it simple, consistent, and just went for what the deck does, which is hit big damage with little HP Pokemon.
So we've got the rule nowadays where 21 days after the street date of a set, you can use a set in the new tournaments. So Primal Clash comes out, and the first tournament you go with, the first deck you go with is Night March. What made you think Night March was going to be the play, given that we didn't know what was going to be coming out?
I just felt that, again, I expected a lot of fairies this weekend, so I wanted to play a deck that is quite aggressive and can sort of hit fairies, because fairies is a slow deck and it will take a while to power up, especially the Guard of Wild builds that we're probably going to see a lot of in the upcoming regionals. But obviously once it gets set up, it's very difficult to deal with, so I wanted a deck that can sort of one hit KO EXs sort of quite early on and just stop them from accelerating energy and keeping energy on the board. I just think it's a deck I've toyed with for a while now. I just think a few cards in the new set give it a bit of extra consistency.
I don't think that's a bad plan at all. Now, going to the new set then, I mean, what do you think about Primal Clash? I mean, did you use any Primal... Because I must confess, I meant to use a teammate but forgot. I just played Excadrill and nothing else. Did you use any other cards other than... did you use any Primal Clash cards at all this past weekend?
I think the only 2 Primal Clash cards I used were Acrobike and Teammates.
So talk us through them. Why Teammates?
Obviously, Teammates is good. When you get knocked out, you can obviously get 2 extra cards, whatever you want. But with playing a deck like Night March, when you've got sort of 30 HP Pokemon and 60 HP Pokemon that you're attacking with, you're going to get knocked out very easily. So it's actually use it quite a lot more than you perhaps would in an EX focused deck where you try and avoid to get knockouts.
I'll buy that. What about Acrobike? Acrobike, the one where you look at 2 cards, discard one, draw the other, was that just to get the Night March in the discard pile? Was it for extra draw and a bit of speed?
A bit of both, to be honest. Yeah, it gives you extra draw. Obviously, bike is traditional bicycle is very conditional on you having a small hand, whereas Acrobike isn't. It can help you get things in the discard pile and Night March in the discard pile if you're fortunate enough, and it just seems to suit the deck quite nicely.
Sweet. So I asked this of Nick last week, and I'm sure I'll be asking it of Emmanuel next week. Tell us about Primal Clash. Which cards have caught your eye? Are there any that you think are going to be potentially game changing, or is there anything in the set that you think we need to really be aware of?
Having looked at Primal Clash and sort of played some decks, I built quite early on. I got a couple of blister packs. I managed to get a 3-2 Kyogre line in around sort of 6 blisters, something crazy.
Nice.
So I just built a Kyogre deck just to see how it was, and again, it was fun. And once it got set up, it was very powerful. But with a lot of the decks coming out in this with Primal Clash, so you've got sort of the fairy decks, you've got Kyogre, you've got Groudon, and you've got Aggron. All the mega focus decks, they hit hard once they get set up, but the problem is getting them set up. They're all quite slow. They're all sort of very slow decks, and it's just something I've traditionally played sort of big basics, fighting decks that are quite quick and quite aggressive, and playing slow decks like that just don't seem to appeal to me as much. I mean, Fairies is a deck that does interest me. I do think it has a lot of potential. I think it can do a lot of damage for only sort of 6 energy on the board. It doesn't have to be on the active. It just seems like a strong card, but I think it'll be a little while before we find the optimal list and the optimal build for it where people are going to run away with it.
I agree entirely, and that echoes pretty much what I said on the podcast last week of the fact that a lot of these new EXs, I mean, Camera Up was another one which I looked at, with the fact that, they're really, really good as soon as you get set up. And I suppose that was why Night March was such a good call this weekend, because, I mean, Tool Drop as well did quite well, because you're essentially looking at these decks which are going to take ages to set up, and just playing these lovely cards that, will beat you before you've set up. Yeah. Maybe even explaining the demise of Virizion Genesect.
I think Virizion Genesect, the more we see these mega decks and the sort of Kyogre and Groudon decks, I think Virizion Genesect will start coming back into the fold a bit more, because they counter the decks quite nicely. The only problem it does have is Silent Lab can be a real pain, and there is virtually no viable stadiums for Virizion Genesect at the moment, which can be a problem, but I still think it'll find its way back into the meta quite shortly.
I don't disagree. I suppose the last question I need to ask you is, are you going to get one of those 22 slots for Europe?
I hope so. I've only got two finish limit for regionals, so I can potentially still get another 300 points. Obviously, that's me winning 2 regionals, which is very unlikely, but I still hope to get some top cuts at regionals and push myself up to around sort of the 650 mark before nationals, leaving it sort of within the balance. I think it'd be good.
Yeah, I think we said at the beginning, the likelihood is that the people who get those are going to be the people who go and do well at nationals. But hey ho, I shall certainly be rooting for you, sir. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.